Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information.
Okay, very, very good. I'm glad to be here. Steph, it's good to see you again. Stephanie Kalota is a U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant, First Class, veteran, and founder and creator of the Veteran Legislative Voice podcast and AHG Correspondent. She's been on the show several times in the past, many times, but it's always very informative about what's going on with our legislative issues. And there's no greater time for her to be on than now. We are now going to have a discussion concerning what does it mean with President Biden deciding not to run for re-election. Kamala becomes Democratic President nominee, and it looks like she's gotten all the delegate votes she needs now. And the upcoming Commander In Chief Geopolitical leadership role that she will be playing and how that looks for the future. And just to find out, how, Stephanie looks at this and sees things playing out for our crisis that we're in this country right now. We have gone through one of the most tumultuous time periods of my life for a presidential campaign that I've ever seen and even heard about. Even reading textbooks about George Washington, we didn't go through quite as much as we've been going through for the last few months with presidential campaigns, problems going on. So, Steph, why don't you lead into it and tell us what is it from your perspective what this means now for our country right now?
Well, it's a very historic moment because for many years we have gone through, basically since the 1970s, we've gone through state primary elections and then a convention. Which has never actually wasn't the original plan for our country when it was first made. We actually didn't have state primaries like we do now to try to help decide who would be the candidates of each primary for each political party. That actually used to be conventions and caucuses. The caucuses, then also primary elections. So it's a very interesting thing for us to go into now because a lot of people are not familiar with that when we're not going through a regular primary election. So some people are like, oh my goodness, how is this legal? How is this going to go through? And it's actually perfectly legal because the alternative, if there is any issue after a primary election, we still have the convention. And that's the reason why many political parties still have a convention, still have a caucus. So that way the delegates could then help decide who would be the political party candidate. There's actually been people that did not win or even run in primary elections, but still won in the convention and then became the political party's candidate. So just FYI, this has actually happened in the last century. So It's not something that has never happened before. And so it's going to actually come up with this upcoming convention next month. It's going to be historic because it's something we haven't actually have gone through in about 50 years. So it's for a lot of people in their lifetime, this will be the first time they'll actually see a convention do some really cool work that's actually going to make a difference. Because usually conventions are just a place for them to hurrah and put out their platforms and for everybody to cheer and the balloons and everything. And it's usually just a tradition that people do and something that you have to go through and do. And so it's not really something that a lot of people pay attention to. But with this Democratic Party convention coming up, it could be something that is very big. Kamala Harris will also probably name her VP by then. That's really common to name VP when they get to the convention. As of yet, there is no challenges for Kamala Harris. And because, yes, majority of the delegates have already pledged to vote for her informally. The Democratic Party will have a virtual roll call still that they had already pre-scheduled before President Biden has pulled out. I believe that's August 8th, but don't quote me on that. I'm bad with dates sometimes. So I'm pretty sure it's August 8th that they do a virtual roll call.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, so and they also were saying that there's a limitation in time for those people who want to challenge that position of running for president. And I think it's like the 27th of July. They made it a very
Yeah.
short time window. You have 3 days to get everything in. I think signatures were required by the end of July. So it's really interesting the way that things are progressing. It's moving very rapidly. But there was a historic amount of money raised, over $100 million within a 24-hour period, which is, I wish I could raise money like that.
I know it's a record breaker too, especially 2/3 of the donations were actually done or 60% of the donations were done by people that have never donated for this election or ever any election before. And then a majority of those donations were actually just regular people, $25, $100, not the millions that, Elon Musk, has pledged to donate to President Trump's campaign. So it's something really historic, and it is an actual record breaker for all of the U.S. history.
Yeah, and then there's also like the issue of people who are voting. So we normally get about 33% of people who vote to begin with.
Yeah.
And this is really with the enthusiasm that's going on. I'm wondering what your thinking is about voter turnout. Will it be greater? Because both campaigns, both the Republican and the Democratic campaigns, are really going straightly forward with trying to get people motivated to vote. And I'm wondering if you think there's going to be any difference in voter turnout.
It is very possible. I mean, voter turnout was actually very historic for the 2020 election, even for during COVID, because there was so many mail-in ballots. But then a lot of places, a lot of poll stations actually ran out of ballots for the people that walked in the day of, which is not really heard of. So it's very possible that it may be another historic turnout. It's also very possible because a lot of states have very big issues on the ballot. I'm a Floridian, so on the ballot is the right for an abortion and also recreational marijuana. So those are pretty big things happening here. And actually, I believe on the signatures for the petition for the abortion ballot, for that measure, 30% of the people that had signed up and petitioned actually identified as Republicans, registered Republicans. So it's a very big thing for Florida to have that. And then other states have other similar measures going on their ballots as well. So the turnout might be pretty darn big. It would be interesting to see.
Yeah. And I heard a rumor that Nikki Haley's followers were sort of supporting Kamala, which I was like, wow.
Yes. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So every time that there is a person that wants to run, they come up with a PAC. And it's just a corporation that they can try to use to try to, put money together, try to have this one-stop shop of running. It's basically just kind of like a corporation for your campaign. And what they do is, so after Nikki Haley had endorsed President Trump, they quietly separated from her. And then once Kamala Harris had actually said, Kamala Harris, because I'm trying to get that correct. Kamala Harris had been pointed to as the Democrat potential candidate because she's not official yet. Yes, they voiced their support towards her, which was pretty interesting. There were a few other people that had put their support in Kamala Harris as well. And the thing that I do want to point out is I heard it earlier from the political pundits from other shows. They've said, well, I mean, who would want to run a presidential campaign now with a little bit more than 100 days left? You have zero money, zero infrastructure set up. No one wants that. It's like one of the worst decisions to do. But the thing is that since Kamala Harris had actually was on the ballot or was on the ticket for Joe Biden, she basically inherits the infrastructure and the funding and everything else. So she's set up really well, and her approval rating's done really well. And I love that there has been a lot of fervor and a lot of support coming towards her. And then it's actually coming up with really great for issues like geopolitical things. She is one step away. Basically, she's a little bit further separated from like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that's happening right now, because Joe Biden's got a lot of heat and a lot of hate because of how he's handling it, which is really, honestly, very difficult to handle because he's not in charge of both areas. All he can do is try to support, try to advise, and try to manage how the support is actually given to them. And it's not very easy to manage at all, especially since he has a very big, he's always been a supporter of Israel, but he's never been the best on the best relationship with Netanyahu. But that's because Netanyahu is probably a step away from President Trump's political platforms. So that relationship probably does not work well on trying to build up relations. Kamala Harris is a little bit separated from it. So it's kind of putting a fresh face and someone to try it completely new. So it can bring back more people that, you know, are concerned about the Palestinian conflict and would honestly hope that Kamala Harris can actually bring in some more support and go the way that they're hoping it would go.
Yeah, and you know, and for veterans themselves, one of the things that you know that sort of have a point of contention with, and this is like totally nonpartisan, my view, but you know, as a veteran, I'm a retired Army colonel, and you know, I have problems with having someone who really, you know, talks about one of my service members who is a Silver Star, recipient, who was in a prisoner of war camp, who, John McCain. I've met him a couple of times when he was alive. Really a good person to talk to. When we talk about being moderate, I really viewed him as being very moderate in many respects. But not someone to be defamed. And when we start putting on things like being a person that is a felon, that is that has sexual assaults, and you go down the list of things that are negative, which really I don't really ascribe to. I don't really support. But then you have someone that's going the current President Biden, who has done many positive things for veterans, with the PACT Act, and there's several different pieces of legislation which have gone through. What is do you think that Kamala will continue with that legacy, with making sure that veterans are getting benefits that they need?
Yes, I completely agree. She was always a supporter for veterans when she was a senator. I mean, she was mostly on the Judicial Committee, but then she also supported other senators that were on the Veterans Affairs Committees and the Armed Services Committees, most specifically for military sexual assault and violence. And she had ardently supported Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who had really advocated for changing the judicial system within the military. And we almost got that. We got very close to what Senator Gillibrand was really hoping for. And then Senator Harris was a ardent supporter of that. And she's also was a prosecutor. She's very understanding when it comes to sexual assault and other judicial issues, which they still need to do some more military justice improvement within the military. So she has a lot of experience on that. Although I will point out, though, for President Trump, he was found civilly liable for sexual assault, not actual conviction of criminal sexual assault. So we got to be careful when we use those words, because it can cause a lot of for a lot of things. So that way, but he was found guilty for fraud. And his organization, Trump University, was found guilty for fraud because it was a for-profit university that basically fraudulently scammed students that didn't have helped them in any way. So it can cause a little bit of issues on who you could support there. Now, for Kamala Harris as well, she has been a big supporter for reproductive rights. And since I mentioned that before with Florida, but with veterans, that's been a big issue of contention that's been happening because after the recension of Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, the VA had added a new rule, interim final rule, with then changed to a final rule. And it basically said that the VA will provide abortions for veterans that that it's going to risk their life or their welfare, basically the health of them, and especially if it contradicts or comes into conflict with their service-connected issues. There's women out there that have many service-connected issues. It could be their back, it could be mental health, and that requires medication. When you're pregnant, you can't be on very many medications. I mean, very low dose of antihistamines and Tylenol, and that is about it. That's all you're really allowed, unless you're fully put into a hospital and they really try to monitor you there. So that rule is there to try to help female veterans keep their lives and keep their the welfare of their lives at a high quality rate.
Yeah, and that's really some of the other things that are of concern are also we are talking about gun violence and that kind of thing going on, and the very weapon that Congress was fighting to ban President Biden and Congress was the AK-4 was the AR-15 that was used in the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And it's really, it's almost ironic the things that are happening, that these things are becoming more confluent, with those violent acts out there, and the need to really address this issue. We're seeing more and more shootings across the country, and police officers being threatened as well as civilians. So it's just uncanny. I'm living in Tinley Park now, but pretty close to Chicago where I used to live, and they're doing smash and grabs, breaking windows, and people feel like they're under duress. But those kinds of things, I think having someone who has that legal experience also in the office may help deal with things, and maybe even with the Supreme Court. I don't know, having had that experience, but that's a whole nother bag, another show. But,
well, the next president is likely going to appoint two or more judges, but that's just at the scale we're at now. So the Supreme Court hasn't always had 9 judges. They've actually justices. They actually used to be more. So so there's a possibility of expanding the court. And the reason why it's actually a good thing to expand the court is that there is actually so much more work that's out there. So if there's more justices out there, the Supreme Court can accept more cases and work on more cases. And so you have more distribution of work out there. So it's actually a good idea to expand the court and the justices. Packing the court, it always has a negative connotation right now, but it's actually would be a good thing because less than 10% of all submissions to Supreme Court is actually accepted and heard. Less than 10%. Okay. So it would be great.
Yeah, well, we're running out of time. You see, this is a really incredible topic. We need to have you back on, but we've run out of time. But I just want you to know that we're going to be contacting you again because we're looking at a time period where it's going to be many, many issues coming up, I think, over the next several months, including DEI. We haven't even touched that topic and some of the things that are put out there. So, okay, but thank you so much, Steph. We will have you back on again. And say hello to your cat again for me, and we will be stopping.
Yes. Thank you.
So stay tuned, and we'll be back.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. July is American Diabetes and National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. I'm your host, U.S. Army Iraq combat medic, veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold. That's a long thing they put down for me. When today we're going to be talking to our partner, Rod Matthew, of the U.S. Navy veteran, co-founder and CEO of Breathian Energy, specializing in microgrid technologies and renewable energy. The discussion today is Breathian Energy updates. And we are in a time period where we need to be being concerned about energy, especially with our transition into the AI world, where they're saying that we need much more energy than we ever needed before. So I'm really glad to have Rod on to bring me up to date. I have my nephews trying to bring me up to date in the technology. I need Rod to tell me about the energy. So Rod, why don't you go ahead, tell us what's going on in the energy world.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'm honored to be here, number one.
Yeah.
I guess what's happening in the energy world is we're seeing a lot more solar and renewable energy projects being deployed, primarily because of the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by the Biden administration. So we're seeing a lot more community solar projects that are being deployed, thanks to what's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds that was recently deployed by the Environmental Protection Agency, so the GGRF. With those funds, a lot of solar for lower to moderate income communities are being set up as we speak. We're looking at a project right here. I'm in San Diego, and we're looking at doing projects really on brownfield sites, on old closed landfills. In a lot of cases, they are just emitting methane into the air. They are eyesores to the communities. And of course, where these are located. They're not located in areas where they have mansions. So primarily they're located in neighborhoods where people look like you and me. So we're looking to clean those up and take it from being an eyesore and a distraction and a medical hazard to the community to actually having the community participate in building a renewable energy power plant where they can receive specialized rates and can even share in some of the profits.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know that the IRA tax credit provisions of that Inflation Reduction Act, and when he signed it into law, I think a lot of people missed that even happened, what the purpose of that was. And it was a phenomenal thing. We talk about all of his accomplishments, on August 16th of 2022, when he signed the legislation. It opened the door for us to move into a whole new world. I mean, it did,
Absolutely.
Reduce the deficit, decreased prescription drug prices. Now insulin is capped, as far as how much money is spent on it. But by investing in domestic energy production while promoting clean energy, he actually revolutionized our way of thinking as a country. He brought us
Absolutely.
out of the old world thinking on energy. And he had, clean energy investments in production and transitions to technology, neutral tax credits, which, we just mentioning, electric vehicles, right? Both personal and commercial. I went to the gas station. I was trying to fill my car up today, and I was like, wait a minute, how much does this cost me? So the gas is starting to eat at my heart today.
Yeah.
And then
the added maintenance and all that stuff that go along with it as well.
Right. And then, building the electrification system and, the efficiency of how we produce energy is amazing. Many people don't realize that, most of the energy that we sort of rely on right now in Illinois is actually from nuclear energy. We have 5 main nuclear plants here, but there's a transition that's going on into solar, into wind technology, and it's more sustainable. So they also did things with biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels as well.
Mm-hmm.
Clean manufacturing, hydrogen production, those kinds of things are in the background. But I think what the approach that you're taking with the energy, the clean energy, is actually going to save us. We're all looking at this global warming, whether people want to realize it or not.
Man.
Yeah, you can believe that the edge of a cliff doesn't make you fall, but you go over it, you'll find out. Right?
Yeah, regardless of what you believe or not, you're still falling.
you still fall. Yeah, and science doesn't ask for you to believe in it, but it's unforgivable if you don't. That's my view of it.
That is so true.
So what kind of energy things do you see us? What do we need to be doing as a nation? And what are you hoping to see happen in the new administration that comes in? I'm hoping that we're moving into a more progressive administration that's going to talk about these things, do the right things.
I mean, the two administrations couldn't be more diametrically opposed on their position for renewable energy. I'll just say that much. Okay. They've already, as part of the RNC convention last week, one of the things that they talked about, as soon as they get in office, they are, putting an end to a lot of the provisions that were made by the IRA to end a lot of the funding for renewable energy, because they feel that it is unnecessary. So, and I'm pretty sure that the Harris and whoever she picks administration will continue the legacy of Joe Biden and, complete those investments, still double down on those investments in renewable energy, because as you say, it's getting hotter. We're seeing more and more storms. We had a storm this year that came like a month and a half before the season and wiped out, it left the whole city of Houston without power for, a week. Some people still without power in that area. So it's just going to increase more and more and more. So we have to do something to try to reverse these effects.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm living in Tinley Park right now, and we have our utilities underground, which is great because you don't worry about the power lines being knocked down and those kinds of things. So we don't really get blackouts from the electricity. But next door, two houses next door to me had trees blown down, and I'm like, what knocked down that tree? I mean, that was a windstorm that knocked them down, even a tornado. But this devastated these trees, tore up the garage, my neighbor's garage. And so it's here. And when we start talking about 85 hurricanes within a short time span in one of our states, right? We are in a very revealing time. And unless we open our eyes and see that this is critical that we address right now, we've been warned by the scientists all the time. And I always have a problem with people who are, scientists, with who people talk about scientists and say, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know. And then they pick up their iPhone and use it, right? They use it.
Exactly.
They use
jump on the computer and get on the internet and
on the computer.
turn on the lights.
Right. Who do you think made that? So we have that kind of time problem. We do. So what do you think as far as veterans, getting involved in this? Do you think veterans need to get more involved in this? This can potentially create a lot of jobs and get people.
That's really one of the things that I wanted to kind of focus on, is that aspect, because it's going to be a complete transition of our energy system, right? Our whole electric grid is going to be modified. You're seeing the deployment of more renewable resources, more microgrids to become more decentralized, if you would say. That gives us a lot more energy security. So you can't have one point of failure to take out a whole city. I'm from a city called Shreveport, Louisiana. I know last year they had a pretty bad, it wasn't a tornado, it wasn't a hurricane or anything like that, just a pretty bad thunderstorm, which they get plenty of down there. A lightning struck one of the primary transformers in that area, which is ironic because my mom worked for the electric company there for about 38 years. But it took out a main transformer, and for about 2 weeks almost in the summertime at triple digit temperatures, the whole city was without power.
And see, that kind of viewpoint brings it to real life, because we had a similar situation in Chicago back in the 1990s, where we had hundreds of deaths because they didn't even have enough, funeral trucks to pick people up. They had to bring in cooling trucks in order to take care of the number of bodies. And when you start looking at the states that were really hit, Arizona and New Mexico, and it go across the country all the way to California, right?
Absolutely.
Mostly the more of the southern states that were really devastated with that heat wave, and there were probably people who died from that. And I haven't heard many reports, and it's sort of being kind of quiet, about what exactly happened in those places. But even Chicago, it took time for them to realize that, hey, we had a lot of deaths from this heat wave, and because people didn't have access to cooling, their air conditioning systems. And if you're in poverty, also, you don't have the resources to do that. Many of our veterans are also homeless. They're living and that kind of thing. So having a cooling center available for them and having the energy supply and able to have that function is critical. And I think that having the redundancy and having an expansion of the energy grid is absolutely critical. So companies like yours are, bringing up the issue. We need to be able to produce energy. And are we going to be diverting our energy that we use for our air conditioning systems to businesses because we need more money to run AI? Well, how are you going to regulate the distribution of this energy in the future? And if it's only about money, then we're dead, right? So
our focus is local generation, right?
Local generation.
Okay. That's really the key. Instead of having to transmit power, most of the energy that we use is generated maybe like 500 miles away from us, and that's where you have all these long, high power transmission lines, and the distribution system. And most of that power, like 70% of it, is lost in transmission, so it's very inefficient. And again, if one of those lines are cut or go down, everybody's down who's past that line. So we want to focus on local generation to minimize that risk, to reduce that exposure level to danger and disaster. If everybody is producing their own energy, we don't really care if the transmission line is down, because you don't even know in most cases, because you're producing your own energy. So that gives stability, that gives that energy security that we lack. So you can take down a whole city just by hitting one point. Right. So for the security purposes, we need to be doing that, not just for resiliency, but for security.
Yeah, and that's really a good point too, because we've been hearing about all these things going on. Now we have the airlines up in the air.
That exposed us. That really exposed us. Let us know just how vulnerable we are to something like a Windows update. Took down the whole country.
Right. That's a Windows update. Click on this button. Right.
Yeah. Took down the whole country. A Windows update. So
you're done.
That goes to show you how vulnerable we are at this point.
Yeah. And then one of the major things I know that we have what we call critical infrastructure and key resource sectors, throughout the country. There are about 19 of them or so, and those one of them is energy production. And those are targets, right? I remember rolling blackouts going through New York City and through the East Coast because one of the power grids went down, or one of the transformers was knocked out, and it wiped out entire cities. If not a larger area of a state. And so the local energy, I think, is really wise. It's and maybe even some redundancy in that,
Absolutely.
On the local.
Yeah.
So
with the deployment of microgrids, we have really three objectives. The first objective is to make power more affordable, right? We can produce it cheaper than the investor-owned utilities can. Secondly, is to make that more resilient. So we give multiple ways of it being up, multiple generation assets combined together, so it makes it power more readily available for you. And last but not least, we want to make it more sustainable, right? Because of all the greenhouse gases that are being produced, we want to reduce that. We want to reduce these storms. We want to reduce it being 120 degrees in the summertime.
Right. And one thing is the geopolitical vulnerability too.
Absolutely.
We're at the point where we are seeing all this hacking going on, and a major system is a major vulnerability point. But if you have multiple systems out there it's going to be harder for them to try to break into a network that's local.
Absolutely. And one of the things that people don't mention with our migration problem,
it's much more widely distributed.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't mention with our issue of migration is the fact that in those areas where people are migrating from, there's famine because they can't grow food because of the changing climate, right? So climate change is affecting our migration policies, which they don't even we don't even really discuss. So those are ramifications of things like these fossil fuels. We need to do everything we can to reduce those, and we want to make it available for low to moderate income people who can't really afford to do it on their own. That's really our goal. And who better to do that than veterans, because they have the propensity for learning and picking up and doing good. So we're really looking for veterans to fill this huge void that we have in the intake that we're going to need to deploy these energy projects. So we're really looking for veterans to do that.
You bring up a really excellent point. Many of our veterans have skills that carry and translate over from the military. Many of them were aircraft mechanics, or they were, mechanized infantry mechanics. They knew that how to sort of work with energy systems or computer systems. So you have a really available force of people who can work on this. And when you
all we need is people who know how to follow directions.
Right.
And that if you were in the military, we know you can do that.
Oh, you can. Yes, you can. That comes from back from basic.
Absolutely.
But one of the things when you were talking about the impact of climate change on people accessing food, and we have desertification going on across. So we have mass migrations of people. But here in the United States, one of the things that we are not paying attention to, I think, enough, is that with these rolling climate change effects that are going through, more tornadoes, more vicious hurricanes, more lightning strikes, all the things that are happening right now. What we are missing the point of is that without energy, we can't respond. When we have emergency response vehicles and people going out and trying to restore energy, people are on ventilators in hospitals. Yes. You have people who are actually using something very similar in their homes when they have people who have disabilities, for life support. We have people who are really vulnerable out there. And so this is a critical issue. It's not something we can put on the back shelf and say, oh, this is something we'll address in 10 years. We need to address it today.
That's why I made it my life mission.
Yeah. I applaud you for that. The possibility for veterans to have these jobs and to do things, this is fantastic. I mean, I couldn't think of a better project to be involved with. Now, what are some of the things that you see as impediments, things in your way to get things implemented in a better way, to make sure you have the hiring capabilities and all that? I'm not going to even talk about DEI with its implications. Being brought up right now, yes.
Our biggest thing is to train the people to do the work. So we just need to train up the workforce. So that's the biggest impediment that we have right now, is a shortage of available skilled solar technicians or skilled renewable energy technicians, skilled EV charger technicians that can install EV chargers, skilled EV mechanics. We're going to need a completely new workforce, right? With some of the skills that we had can transfer over, but we're going to have to acquire a whole new set of skills in order to facilitate this transition. And again, I can't see anybody better to fill those roles than veterans who already have the propensity of learning new skills.
Yeah, and what about the schools for that? Are there more schools opening up now, or the training centers?
There are a lot of training centers that are opening up. There are a lot of programs that are associated with this right now that are providing direct workforce development training. Some of the unions, the IBEW in particular, they're providing a lot of these trainings because there is going to be a huge need for solar technicians, for renewable energy technicians. And Illinois is one of the states that has really adopted the use of renewable energy technologies, and we see a lot of action going on in that state.
Well, how do people contact you for your company, for Breathian Energy? How do they get in touch with you if they're interested in it? Because we have many veterans who are listening to the show right now, for advice or to get, to try to get into a program. And, I'm not sure of what the funding mechanism is for the training, whether as a veteran you have, resources,
there are all types of resources for veterans that are for free. We've been on this show before. We've put out a list of some free resources that you can get some training. And I'd be more than willing to share that list again with anybody who's listening, because we need as many people as we can to help make this transition. Okay. So to get in touch with me, you can go to our website, and that's Brevian. That's BREVIAN energy.com. Again, that's brevianenergy.com. Or you can always reach us at sales@brevianenergy.com. Or you can reach me directly at area code 760-925-5500. 760-925-5500.
That is a dedicated CEO.
Yeah, reach me directly.
Reach you directly. Wow. Yeah. So, we have about 2 more minutes to go, but I want you to, in this last 2 minutes, just give me, what you think people need to know, in short order, and then we can, move on from there. But we're definitely going to have you back multiple times, because this problem is not going away overnight, and we're going to need someone as dedicated as you focusing on it. So go ahead, Bob.
Absolutely. I just want to say, number one, thank you again for having me, letting me share on this platform, on this very esteemed platform. The energy transition now is starting right now, right? With the help of the Biden administration, it has really accelerated the growth of these kind of projects. So we just need everyone to be diligent, everyone to be keep in mind that we are faced with a grave challenge right now of global warming or climate change. I don't want to say global warming, but we're facing a huge issue of climate change. So we all must do what we can to help protect the only place that I know that we have to live, and that's here on Earth, right? So do everything you can, try to recycle, try to, turn down your energy or carve your energy uses when you can. So we can all benefit in the long run.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I want everyone to stay with us. We are now moving and transitioning to our next topic. But stay with
AHG Connects, where voices, information,
thanks again, Rod.
and resources
Appreciate it.
are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and powered intentionally.
Hello. Welcome to America Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. July is American Diabetes and National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. I'm your host, U.S. Army Iraq combat medic veteran, Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold. And for our guest panelists, this is really a person that is extremely important in some of the things that are going on right now. She is a person who's a correspondent extraordinaire, but Julie Rovner is a chief Washington correspondent and host of the KFF News Weekly Health Policy Podcast. And she brings a wealth of information, has been very, very supportive of the things that we've been doing for veterans over a long-term period of time as we've been broadcasting. Today, we're going to discuss the KFF Health News article, Harris Wants Biden's Voice on Abortion Would Take an Outspoken Approach to Health. This is really one of the key central issues that I think her campaign is addressing. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Julie. And why don't you tell us why this is important, what you think that this approach is, why it's needed right now to have this approach as well.
Well, I think up until now, the presidential campaign has been very much focused on the issues that the Republicans would like it focused on, for the most part: immigration, crime. To some extent, the Democrats have focused on reproductive health and abortion. But as we all know, that was not an issue that President Biden was super comfortable talking about. He, practicing Catholic, older gentleman, it was not sort of his most comfortable issue. So he basically delegated it to the vice president, who has been outspoken over the course of her career, not just about abortion rights, but about other reproductive health issues, about maternal health in general and African-American maternal health in particular, and what a really abysmal job the United States does in general with maternal health. Plus, when she was the Attorney General in California, she did a lot of work with things like health antitrust and prescription drug prices. So there's every reason to believe that as she sort of takes over at the top of the ticket, which is certainly what seems to be happening now, we're going to probably see a lot more discussion about healthcare issues writ large than we've seen, at least thus far this year.
Yeah, and one of the things that is really gets to my heart, as a practicing physician, retired now, but I always have nightmares about what is happening to women in the interim. In many of these states, and this is a very nonpartisan view, but it's the inhumanity and the lack of compassion being shown to women who find themselves in these situations, especially in all the situations. I don't want to minimize any of them, but when you have rape and incest and those kinds of issues, I can't see how you could be morally supportive of something that is coming out of such a heinous act, and to not have the woman have the right to decide what course she wants to take in life with that. I'm a male, but I can imagine if I were female and I was raped or I had incest, I had to live with the consequences of that for the rest of my life. Every time I look at this child, I have to remember what I went through in order to be in this situation. And I think it's morally, and some people can deal with that. Some people decide to go on and do whatever they feel is right in their own religious view or in their view of life. But I think women should have the ultimate choice. It's your body. Every time you go to the hospital and you have a procedure done, you have a surgical procedure or a medical procedure, they have you sign a consent form. And the consent form says that I agree to having this procedure done because this is my body and this is what, I can't see how this doesn't extend to that. And so, what do you think some of the hurdles that are going to be thrown in her way? Or is there a need to revitalize the conversation around this and making sure that people understand what is really at stake?
I think that in some ways, the bigger we've seen it happen so more often are women who are later in pregnancy, who have pregnancy complications, who are, by and large, these are women with wanted pregnancies who tried hard, in many cases, spent tens of thousands of dollars to get pregnant, have, set up nurseries and decorated them already. And then at 18 or 20 or sometimes even 24 weeks, something goes terribly wrong. And either, the pregnancy is sort of incompatible with life. What happens frequently is that the woman's water breaks early, which basically means that the fetus can't survive and she is at risk of all kinds of infection and terrible consequences, including loss of life and loss of future fertility, the ability to have another baby. And we've seen this play out in a number of states with abortion bans. In Idaho, for instance, where the ban said that doctors could not perform abortions even in medical emergencies, only in life-threatening medical emergencies. We've seen women being airlifted out to other states who normally would get treatment, who, again, are put at greater risk because they have to wait longer. They have to wait and then be put on a helicopter and taken somewhere else rather than be treated at the medical facility where they are and where there's a medical professional who is able to do the procedure that they need. And yet it is deemed illegal. And this is a legal fight that is still continuing to this day. So I think there's a lot, we saw this in Texas, a number of women who had health-threatening complications with their pregnancies sued. And basically the Texas Supreme Court said, not up to us to figure out, what's illegal and what isn't. It's up to the doctors. And the doctors, these laws have penalties that involve jail time and hundreds of thousands of dollars and loss of medical licenses. And they are legitimately concerned about doing things that they believe are medically indicated, but they could possibly be hauled into court for.
So what do you think should be done now? What do you see as the major position that should be taken as far as if a president, soon to be President Harris succeeds and winning winning the presidential election? What do you think should be the view taken, and how can things be made better? Is it something that she has to approach the Congress on, or the legal system? How can she sort of implement a better policy position?
Well, at this point, it's mostly in the courts. It would be very difficult. Congress could pass a law to what they call codify Roe v. Wade, which was, basically create in law what had been a constitutional right. It's unclear, what the Supreme Court would think of that, what the lower courts are going to do. A lot of this is going to continue to play out at the state level and at the legal level, although there's certainly, if Donald Trump gets back into office and if he follows some of the recommendations in both the Republican platform and some of the things that are in, the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 blueprint, it would be easier for the Republicans to institute a national ban than it would for Democrats to basically preserve abortion rights, even in some of the places where it, remains today. It's more of an uphill fight for the Democrats than it would to get back to where they want to be than it would be for the Republicans to go further than they are now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yes. Yeah. And, that's that Project 2025 is a 999-page document that, it seems like they tried to distance themselves from, but many of the people that were on the, who were members of his, his staff and other people who were in, like Ben Carson and all that, were authors on this document. And it is really, I mean, it should terrify the American people if they really understood what was in that document. And it's also has a lot of issues surrounding veterans as well. I think it says page 641 on, they talk about veterans for about another 15 pages, and some of the things that will be occurring with veterans. So for veterans have to be aware that your benefits and other things that you are looking at can be potentially threatened and can be minimized in a way. And this is by someone who said, well, veterans are suckers and losers. But I mean, I'm not sure if I want to put my fate into the hands of someone like that. But so one of the things, too, is that she also is pushing forward on women's rights in general. So not just, we have a tendency to look at abortion and that, but this will be a historic movement that we probably needed to do a long time ago, is to have a female president of the country. Many other countries have beat us to that, even though we call ourselves a democracy, where you do have women who have served in that high role and have done very well, overseas. So what do you think about that, her coming into that role, and what that will mean for the movement of the women's voices in Congress as well, because they are directly connected to a president now that is in that light. So, any thoughts on that?
I will say I'm not good at predicting who's going to win what, but what I will definitely say is that, during this week when we have seen, everyone sort of flock towards, supporting Kamala Harris, the level of excitement I've seen from women in general, from Black women in particular, and Asian women, is really off the charts. I have not seen sort of this level of excitement about people. I think after Hillary Clinton lost, there was just this thought that America isn't going to be ready for, a woman president for a very long time. And here we are 8 years later. Is America ready now? I don't know, but certainly there's a lot of people who are going to work very hard to make America ready.
Yes, yeah. And it's shame on us if we can't, come to that in this decade, in this year 2024, that we are still, looking at issues of gender, with the ability to assume leadership. That really is something that we have to sort of self-reflect on ourselves as a nation and think about what we're saying. So, I'm wondering also if do you think that there is a more of a need to get women to understand the implications of this election? One of the things I heard, and I mentioned on an earlier portion of the podcast, is that there are people who were actually moving from the Republican Party, candidates over to supporting Kamala. So I've been hearing, rumors in the background of that happening, because I think there are people who are standing up for moral integrity, looking at, some of the traditional values we've had. Not all of them are bad, that we've been holding very dear to our heart. And I'm wondering if that is something that would be important, to reaching out to them. And then also the second issue I would love to address is having her as a commander in chief, because she'll become the commander in chief of the military services. And I know she has a lot of respect for veterans. I've seen that happen, in multiple occasions, a lot of things that were passed through legislation and such. But any thoughts on those two issues, really galvanizing the messaging that's going out to women to to understand what this means for you, your daughters, your, aunts, your, how does this affect you personally? And then also, how will this sort of roll out as her being a commander in chief of the military?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about how she's going to roll out as commander in chief. I would say, obviously she does not have a military background, but neither have many presidents who've come before her, many male presidents who've
Right.
come before her. But I will say that in terms of mobilizing women and on women's issues, I do think we're starting to see a focus, and obviously it's the end of July, the election is actually getting pretty close, that there really is an enormous difference between these two candidates. There was an enormous difference between, President Biden and former President Trump too, but people were having sort of trouble getting over that. They were saying, sort of two old white men, what's the difference? There are big differences in what each of these parties would like to do in terms of pushing forward an agenda. And those agendas could not be more different. I've been covering politics since the 1980s, and this is perhaps the biggest, widest divide between the parties that I think I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really worrisome, because once someone is elected, either of the parties, right, Republican or Democratic, then you have to bring the nation back together again. And if you have so much division, and we have too many issues, the prior segment, we were talking about energy production and climate change and all the devastation we're seeing going across the country with heat disasters. And, we're going to have emergency responders up-tempo, and more of them to deal with some of the catastrophic things we're seeing across the country. And we can't have a country divided on those principles, to be able to respond to citizens in a rational way. And people may have even less faith in the government, and when we need to have actually more faith, I think, in governmental institutions. I've spoken to people before about, the government, and there's some people who are anti-government. And what I usually tell them is, well, I want you to stop driving down the highway. And they go like, what are you talking about? I said, well, the government covers that, right? They're the ones who built the highways. They maintain them. They regulate them. I said, also, you may want to think about, not even leaving your home, because even the stores you go to, they have governmental oversight by your local government and the tax structure. And maybe your school should close because, they're giving the tax money to your school so your children can learn. So anti-government, a really extreme anti-government sentiment is really not, it doesn't make any sense. And so we hopefully people will not be trying to do those same things. When President Biden was talking previously, talking about gun control, and Kamala Harris was sort of pushing for gun control, and we had, unfortunately, a former president, Trump being an assassination attempt on his life with an AR-15, which is one of the things that we were trying to ban on the streets. Those things bring to light that this really has consequences when we have a division and we start trying to separate things. And one of the sentiments from the Trump administration was that government is a deep state, and we had the Secret Service that were terrible people before, but now they're great because they saved me on the stage. We can't keep vacillating back and forth about whether government is good for us or not. And I'm hoping that the next administration is actually going to strengthen our view of government and why it's important, why we have people sitting there, why do we elect representatives and vote. So only about 32% of people vote every election, 33%. I've been, hearing different numbers. But what do you think it is that needs to be done to get people up and voting? I mean, because that, for the women's rights, that is going to be a critical issue. The abortion rights, the women's rights, having women leaders in leadership positions. What needs to be done to motivate people to realize, and particularly women to realize that I need to get out there and vote?
I think people really need to understand what the stakes of this election are. I think actually Republicans have done a really effective job over the last 10 or 15 years. It's not so much that they're anti-government, it's they're anti-federal government. They believe that the federal government should basically defend the country from, beyond the borders and not a whole lot else. That's why you're constantly hearing Republicans talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, getting rid of the Department of Energy, and getting rid of, all of these things that have grown up pretty much since, FDR. And everything that the federal government does, they think could better be done at the local or possibly state level. And one of the ways that they've sort of effectuated that is by throwing sand in the gears, stopping spending bills from getting done, stopping any legislation from getting done, when the Republicans were last in charge of the Senate, they spent most of their time appointing judges. And now we're seeing what a lot of these judges are doing, which is blocking a lot of regulations in the administrative state that Democrats want to do to regulate health and safety and energy and other things that everybody depends on. And the Republicans done a really effective job at making the public really skeptical about the ability of the federal government to do things that will make their lives better, because they've basically prevented the federal government from doing things to make their lives better. How do you fix that? I'm not sure. But I think that, I'm for sort of universal civics education. I feel like people don't understand how the government works, or when people, stop things from happening. People say, well, President Biden hasn't done anything. Well, first of all, he's gotten a lot more done than one would assume with the tiny majorities that there have been in the Congress, but also, things he's not gotten done are because things were blocked by his opponents. And then they get to say, look, he hasn't done anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's one of my pet peeves is the civics issue. Many people probably couldn't pass a basic citizenship test if you ask them, and that's for getting your citizenship if you're coming into the country. And one of the things from that is that they, how can you actually stand and take an oath to anything? We take oaths in the courtroom. We take oaths for, being elected to different positions. You take an oath if you're going to become a police officer or, fireman, right? The different oaths we take. And in the military, we have, the enlisted oath and the officer's oath, and you're taking those. And how can you take an oath to a country you know nothing about? You have to, have that civics lesson instilled in you so that you understand what you are taking an oath to. I pledge allegiance to the, United States of America. So what does that mean if you don't know what the United States of America stands for or what the civics behind it is? And I think they cut a lot of that out of the schools or glossed it over, or, just did a poor job of instructing people on that. I get really incensed when I see different late night shows on television, and they walk up to someone and say, well, what president was George Washington? What number was that? They go like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15. Basic things that people just don't know about, how the legislative structure, what are the 3 branches of government, So I'm totally with you on that. And I think maybe that's something that needs to be brought up too. We need to reinvigorate that understanding of what the country is. I've been to, in my military career, 26 different countries, right, over my time course of being in the military. And I can tell you, I feel much more comfortable every time I get home. You're looking at what people have to confront and face in many countries. They don't have the items and luxuries that we have here. And we sort of take things for granted. But I think we need to have an understanding of what that means, what it means to be, a citizen of this country and having the right to vote and being able to go out and express your opinion freely without, reprimand or being thrown into a prison. We're seeing, one of our reporters right now being thrown into prison in Russia, right? And, we don't know what his fate is going to be because of the way that they operate their court system. So we have a lot to be grateful for here that we just take for granted. And I think people need to sort of wake up a bit and say, well, this is a really critical time, as you were saying, that we're confronting more divisiveness than ever before in history. And we need to come back to a consensus that we are American citizens. And in order for this country to survive, we have to come together. We have to work things out, not run away from them and pick up our arms and go to the different poles,
I think it would be helpful if people sort of knew what government, so what government can and can't do. I think that's that sort of understanding is lacking. And so it becomes easy to sort of, provide misinformation and disinformation, excuse me, and, promise people things that you can't deliver, or tell people things that can't be delivered that actually could be delivered. I think people are genuinely confused. I know that I'm genuinely confused about issues sometimes that I don't cover. It's one of the reasons I became a journalist. I hope to explain things to people in a way that they can understand what it is that's at stake and what it is that they want. I mean, sometimes, people say they don't vote because they don't know who to vote for, because they can't figure out who would best represent what they want, which is kind of a frustration with our politics and a frustration with our media. It's, it is a big thorny issue, but I feel like it's only gotten worse over the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, and and that's one of the things that really strikes at the heart, is that when we talking about what do veterans do for our country, and someone asked me this before, when I went to Iraq for the first time, they said, well, what were you doing over there, protecting, President Bush's oil and, investments and all these things. And I said, that doesn't matter to me. And they looked at me and they said, what do you mean it doesn't matter to you? And I said, I put my hand up to take an oath to defend the nation against foreign and domestic enemies. That is what I did. What it did was give you the right to have public debate and discussions, to be engaged with the political process, to vote, and to be able to stop us from going to a war if you think it's unjust. But that's not my position. That is not what I do. What I do is step up and defend the nation when it becomes necessary. If you're not involved in the political process, then why are you asking me a question like that? So did you vote? Have you written your Congress people, congressional members and senators? Have you actually done anything to talk about what you're talking about, other than be an arm, chair quarterback after the game is over? So I am, of that notion that people need to be more engaged in the political process, because you're a citizen. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have these discussions, and not, where you become so diametrically opposed, or you become so polarized that you can't see someone else's position. We need to have more rational talks, and come to conclusions that really preserve what the Constitution was supposed to be giving us. And it was the freedom, to express ourselves, but also the freedom of choice, and to be able to live your life the way you feel you should be able to, within legal parameters, right? And I really feel that we need to bring that back. And it goes back to that core issue about civics. I think you were talking about that people need to learn that they have a position in the country, and they need to be involved. So one of the greatest things they can do is actually go out and vote. The people that I was dealing with had to go overseas and fight, and some lost their lives. Voting is a much easier thing to do, a much easier task. So thank you so much. And we always run out of time really quickly, but you're going to be back on, I know. So thank you so much, Julie Rovner, Chief Washington Correspondent and host of the KFF News and Weekly Health Policy Podcast. Listening to her, really great information coming out of that. And I want everyone who's listening to stay where you are. We have other shows coming up, and we're going to go on until we finish this this discussion tonight and give you some more great information coming up. Thank you.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where information and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Well. Welcome back. America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show.
AHG Connects, where voices, information.
Hi, I'm excited to be back here.
July is American Diabetes and National Minority Health Awareness Month. And today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. And we have a partner, and we haven't seen each other in a while, have we? No, we had an earlier podcast together. And I have Stephanie Kalota, a U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, a veteran, and also founder and creator of a Veterans Legislative Voice podcast, and AHG Correspondent. She actually is going to be talking about something that's really critical for veterans, and I'm hoping you're listening and you have your pens out, you're able to write some things down. But these are updates on upcoming legislation that impacts our military and the life of military veterans and their families. And this is something that you really need to be keen on. Many times we don't get the information we need, and we miss out on opportunities and, to address some really critical issues for our healthcare and for ourselves in general, our benefits. So that's why Stephanie has been working so hard in the background to make sure that she has this information that is going to be germane for you to know in order to address issues for veterans. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Stephanie. But what do you see on the horizon? What's coming up that we need to know about right away?
Well, I'll say first, I'm actually excited to talk about something other than the election. Usually, I'm so excited to talk about the election because it's usually something you only really talk about or focus on one year every couple of years. So now I'm excited to focus on legislation, my regular meat of my work. And so with the legislation that's coming up, the biggest one, or the first thing I want to bring up is something that comes up every year, and that's the National Defense Authorization Act. The Senate had completed their package of the bill. Basically, this bill funds the government, at least as far as it goes with the Department of Defense and the VA. The VA is often included on a lot of the legislation in the National Defense Authorization Act. A lot of people don't realize that, but they do. Their funding is also covered in about 2 or 3 other funding acts, but this one is like the most critical one and the most watched. The Senate finished their first draft of their package, and it has most of the usual stuff, for funding, how much for this, how much for that. And then the very common topic that's come up again is adding women to the military draft.
Yes.
Yes, so that topic has come up. It comes up every year, every couple of years. Actually, in the last year, it's come up at least 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
And it is a very big point of contention between both parties, the left and the right. The biggest one in the last year, Representative Chip Roy had actually said that the reason the military is so poor right now is because of the women in it.
Oh.
So, of course, he's against the military draft, including women. So
Wow.
it's lovely. Wanted to remind everybody that our lovely representative from Texas had said that about us. But in a lot of organizations that has done polls of veterans, between 60 and 80% of members in these veterans organizations actually support including women in the military draft.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I could vote if I was a woman, or how I would vote for someone. Anyway, that's another story. But okay.
Okay. So I know a lot of civilian women. So because I'm the only, in my immediate family, I'm the only female veteran. So I do have I have an aunt that also served, and she was the first woman in my extended family to actually serve in the military. My grandfathers both served, so my grandmothers were military wives, so they get a little bit of an exposure there. But a lot of times women don't understand all the things that goes into what we need to do when we're in the military. So a lot of times the only reference that they think of is like G.I. Jane with Demi Moore. So that is not how it is in the military 99% of the time, unless you go Ranger and Navy SEAL. So it's actually, there's a pretty good conservative lifestyle that is given to a lot of women that's in the military. And then there's been a lot of movements and differences in regulations for women in the military, like hairstyles and things. So, and I say that for hairstyles, not saying for us to be, all dramatic and wanting to be about ourselves. But then the thing is that having your hair up in a bun for very long hours can cause migraines. It can cause hair loss. It can cause a lot of other issues for women. And they actually have changed a lot of regulations for women. So that way they're less likely to have these medical issues while they are serving.
Well, do you think there's a need to have a change in the enculturation process? Because, historically we've had these things about, jobs are, male, and then their jobs are female. And there seems to be that part of the enculturation process. So even in the educational system, there needs to be sort of a shift or a change in that thinking. Because how can you draft someone when you told them that we've raised you for another kind of role?
Right. But it's also the chicken before the egg. Which one came first? Because for people that, we have been saying it. I mean, ever since I was a little girl, you can do anything. Although we still haven't had a woman president. We didn't have a woman vice president. There's a lot of glass ceilings still out there. And I'm almost 40. So it's pretty interesting on how that goes. And sometimes you kind of need to force the issue a little bit. The military actually desegregated before the rest of the United States. It actually desegregated because of President Truman, I believe in 1947 with his executive order. So a decade and a half before the Civil Rights Movement. And it still was a very rough, transition. It did take a long time, and they still have issues of racism and discrimination in the military. But are we going to wait for the culture to change, or are we going to wait to actually change the rules and actually try to influence the culture to change with it?
Yes. I agree. Yeah. The rules need to be changed so that we are on, and the whole draft issue. I mean, it's something that the draft legislation, this means that you have to register, but the draft is pretty much a volunteer military right now, service. And I think that is really interesting because once we started really with the volunteer services, you saw an escalation in a number of women in the military, who volunteered to come in and to work within the service. So
Well, there was actually a mandatory cap of women in the military, so they couldn't actually enlist or have people in the military or women in the military to a certain extent. They couldn't be in up to a certain rank. We didn't have a female general for many years, for many decades after the women started being allowed in. So yeah, there was a big change after the volunteer service and they ended the cap. They still, I mean, it took still decades for them to open it up, all MOSs for the women. So it's one of those things. But the thing is that a lot of countries have the equal draft for both men and women as well. I mean, Israel, there's the mandatory service for the 2 years, and women and men have to do it as soon as they turn 18. I think South Korea, but I cannot remember if they include women on their service as well. But they serve, and so the thing is that we got to catch up to the other countries as well.
A lot of things. I was mentioning on another podcast with someone that, you know, having the first female president. I mean, many countries have already had a female president, so, and we're, you know, the leading democracy. So something to be said about that. But what do you think about the legislation? What do you think needs to be addressed now? Now under President Biden, we had the PACT Act. We have you know, multiple pieces of legislation that are beneficial to veterans. But from your perspective, what do you see us sort of lacking in, or what do we need to do in the future? What areas do you think still need to have more of a focus or more of a push and more of a veterans input into it?
There's a few pieces of legislation. One, for instance, is the Richard Starr Act. And that one has come up recently. Senator John Tester has actually been fighting for this to get pushed out, Major Richard Starr Act to get pushed out of just, that it's sitting in the committee and get it to vote. And so that act actually would end a restriction from being able to collect military retirement pay and also wartime pension. When you're at certain rates and certain levels, you can't actually collect both or double dip. Here I'm trying to find it. So right now, veterans with fewer than 20 years of service and a disability rating of less than 50% have their retirement pay reduced by $1 for every dollar of the disability pay that they get. So technically, I am one of these people, although mine is also a reserve retirement because I was forced to retire at 15 years medically for medical reasons. But my disability rating is higher than 50. So if mine actually drops below 50, I would be part of this. And so this actually would, if this was approved, it would actually add, it would basically have an average offset for these veterans, $1,900 per month. So if they can have that extra $1,900 per month, imagine what they can really do. They could pay off bills. They could probably find themselves some better health care and other issues, because if they have less than 50% of their retirement, less than 50%, they actually can't really get very much on the healthcare side, on the health insurance. So they can use this funding to really try to take care of themselves and their families.
Yeah, and that's such a terrible concept. Every dollar you have. I know they do that with the Social Security. If you continue to work, they'll take $1 for every, $1 for every $3 you make or something like that. But but then it becomes a situation where you have committed your life to this, and you've acted honorably, had your service, and why should a disability now cause you to have more of a problem?
Right. Right. And a lot of these people that serve less than 20 years, they wanted to get to 20. There's a reason why they didn't get to 20. And it's often because of a medical issue. Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things that they couldn't help to retire, at that time frame. And the thing is that it actually doesn't affect very many retirees. It only affects 50,000. So we're not talking about a whole lot of money. We're not talking about millions and millions of dollars every year or billions of dollars a year. It's actually a very small amount. So in the long run, it actually could help more people than it can hurt.
That's right. Yes. And it also, you know, people who are looking at that they don't realize that the youth, when they look at veterans and how they're being treated, gives them the indication of whether they want to join the service or not. You know, if they see someone being mistreated and you know, and being called suckers and losers and and such, you know, you know, what does that do for enlistment? People are going to say, forget it. You know, why should I do that? You know, you take care of it. But that's another.
Well, yeah, I know it's another subject for another time. But the thing is that for people that really want to support these veterans and make sure that they can actually get this benefit and be able to better themselves, for what you guys now that are listening and watching live, and recorded later, you guys can actually call your representative and your senator. So you can Google that, find my representative, who's my senator. And you can also call up Senator Jon Tester's office. They actually don't mind anyone that, you know, if you're not from his state, you can definitely call, because he's part of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and that he wants to hear from everybody. And so you call them and say, all right, what do I do? How can I make this pass? How can I get involved on trying to get this passed for our veterans? So just call them up, the regular office, ask them, you know, can I speak to the veteran liaison, the liaison that handles the Veterans Affairs, and they can get you set up and they can tell you what to do, because they need more constituents trying to push the issue. And what's most likely doing right now, although they probably will not say it to the public or tell the truth, that it's probably sitting at somebody's desk high up there that just hasn't put it to vote yet. And so in the House, that's Speaker Mike Johnston. For the Senate, that is Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. So we'll have to see, but give them a call, give Senator Tester's office a call, and they can try to route you to the right place so that you guys can make a really big difference.
Oh, fantastic. That's really a great thing to do. Also, you know, you were mentioning that there were a couple of other pieces of legislation you thought were important. So, but that's something that I think everyone should be jumping on. And we have to be participatory in this process. You know, they're not going to if they hear veterans are upset and they are part of the voting bloc. Believe me, they may listen a little bit. To what
that is saying. Very true. That is very true. I mean, a lot of politicians like to use this as props. But then again, once they hear that we're pissed off, they're like, oh, no, we don't really want to get on your side. So because once the news finds out that a veteran is shorted or in trouble or anything like that, all the cameras zoom in and just point them out, and it just blows up from there. I mean, when the Republicans voted, the Senate Republicans voted against the PACT Act on the very final or second to last vote, all the veterans had showed up on the steps of Capitol Hill, and it drew a lot of attention. It was really fun to watch. I just like to eat popcorn and watch when those things happen. But another legislation to point out had actually been reported, which means that they had, it's already been introduced. It's gone to the committee. The committee has heard it. They discussed it. And they reported it, which means that they're supposed to have a vote soon and see if it can be moved out of the committee. And this one is called the VSAFE, VSAFE. It's an acronym, Act of 2021. And it's a House bill. It was introduced by Representative Elise Stefanik, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I always get hers messed up for some reason. I'll say that this isn't a very great bill. So this is more of a warning to watch out for. So it sounds great. What it does is that it establishes the Department of Veterans Affairs Veterans Scam and Fraud Evasion Officer. So sounds like a good thing. So when you look through the bill, so you can actually look it up. You can Google VSafe Act of 2024, and it'll pop up on congress.gov, and you can actually read it. It's a very short bill. If you print it out, it's probably 2 pages long. And so the first part of it is really good. It actually tries to help it basically helps a one-stop shop for consistent guidance to help with people that are employees, veterans, families, caregivers, survivors, to try to identify, report, and avoid fraud and scam attempts, which veterans often are pretty targeted for scams. So that part sounds really great. But then you move into it, and it's one part is developing methods to monitor fraud and scam metrics within the department. The thing is that the Office Inspector General is already supposed to be doing this. So yes, so it's either really redundant or it just creates a whole new office within them. So then they got to do some more stuff and things like that. And so what it's supposed to do is supposed to provide internal and external reporting, enable advanced data analytics, and really, honestly, it's things that the IG is already doing. And the biggest thing that when you read this bill and you come to the bottom, there's a little section that says full-time employees. It says nothing in this section authorizes an increase in the number of full-time employees otherwise authorized for the department.
Yes.
So you're creating a whole office, something that they already do, and then separate it, take these people aside of people that are already working and probably have very full-time jobs. They probably have more work than they really can deal with right now. Yeah. And then make them do this without any extra funding, any extra people.
Yeah. I used to be the director for the Illinois Department of Public Health from 2007 to 11, and we called those unfunded mandates.
Yes. Well, there's another little sneaky thing that this bill does. And so a lot of things, and the typical politician bill tricks, a lot of people that really hate that actually doesn't happen a whole often, but I've actually found it a few times today. And this one that has nothing to do with fraud for the Veterans Affairs, for veterans within the VA, none of that. It actually is a modification for certain housing loan fees. What it does is that it actually increases the fees that the VA charges borrowers for its home loan guarantees. And what that would do would actually reduce direct spending by $22 million. But the problem is that, you save, they're actually trying to reduce spending. But the problem is that those fees could then be put on the veterans.
Yes.
They do the loans.
Yes.
So now you're increasing fees for loans and trying to increase more spending that the veterans have to do to pay for something like this.
Yeah. And right now, the housing situation is such a problem, with the interest rates out there and, trying to get housing is more problematic. And really, it sounds like it's shifting the fee to the veterans, which is not.
It's very frustrating. So I do want to point out one last thing before we end off. So actually,
was at one point you were making, going back for your first piece of legislation, if you're having dollar for dollar and you're decreasing that, you have less money to spend now on this housing issue. So
right. Well, speaking of money, I got a segue for one last thing. It's not legislation, but they actually had a hearing. There was actually a hearing yesterday in the House, and it's with the Committee of Veterans Affairs. And within the Committee of Veterans Affairs, they actually have a subcommittee, and it's the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Committee. Now, this committee does actually oversee a lot of things that the Veterans Benefits Administration oversees. So VA disability. So they had a big hearing yesterday. It was kind of overshadowed by the Secret Service director having her hearing and the whole blow up from there and everything else that was going on. So I really encourage people to look that up. Just Google House Committee on Veterans Affairs hearing, and actually it's the first one on the list right now because they update it every so often, and it's less than an hour long. So you can really look at it, watch it, and you can really get a lot of info from it. One of the things I do want to point out is I really want people to encourage people to try to read between the lines and try to figure out what people are saying, because we are talking about politicians, and the person running this subcommittee is, overall pretty good. But one of the things that I do want to point out in the hearing was one of the things that he pointed out to really make the VA look terrible. So the VA Inspector General issued a report in that they had estimated that the Veteran Benefits Administration, the VBA, had an error rate of roughly 75% in claims where veterans were seeking 100% rating based on their inability to work. These are called TDIU, total disability individual unemployability claims. Means that your actual rating doesn't add up to 100%, but the thing is that you're still unable to work. So It gives you basically getting paid at 100%. Now, they actually had estimated that the TDIU claims processing errors resulted in at least $100 million in improper payments.
Oh.
A lot of money. But the thing is that this politician implies, that makes it sound like, because a lot of the times when he is making out this little summary of this hearing, he only really points out the overpayments, which is understandable because that's taxpayers' money. But the thing is that when you actually go into the hearing, and then you pull out the witness statement there, they actually will find that they underpaid most of these veterans for TDIU claims around $86 million.
Okay. So
yeah.
Right.
So it's not overpayment, but it's still pretty bad.
Okay, Stephanie, we're running out of time now, but Stephanie,
Kalota,
U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, veteran, founder, creator of Veteran Legislative Voice podcast, and AHG correspondent. You're doing a wonderful job. Thank you for clarifying those issues. I'm going to be online tonight trying to get those things, the House bill and all that. Taking a look at it, it's critical for us to know that. So with that, I want everyone to stay where you are. We have another podcast coming up in a short time. Just stay with us, and we will be back.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Hi, how are you? I can't hear you. Hi, good afternoon. Hi, thank you everyone who's listening. Hi, thank you to everyone who's listening. My name is Danitza James, and I am the CEO of Repatriate Our Patriots. I'm an Army combat veteran, and I am advocating for the rights of veterans who have served our country who find themselves deported. It's been a while since I've been here. The last time it was several months ago. Hi, thank you, and welcome everyone who's listening. My name is Danitza James. I am an Army combat veteran, and I am the CEO for Repatriate Our Patriots. Today, I'm here to provide you an update with what's going on with deported veterans. Yeah, you heard that right. Veterans are being deported. Yes, those service members who have served our country and have signed on the dotted line, who are not U.S. citizens, they find themselves deported. if they don't obtain their naturalization during service. I know it was hard for me to grasp as an immigrant myself when I first found out that veterans were being deported. I didn't know that was even a possibility. I had served, in the Army, did 2 combat tours to Iraq, all with a green card. I was not a U.S. citizen. So for me to find out that veterans were being deported, I was really shocked. So today I want to provide you with an update and just with this heavy heart and pressing concern that really demands all of our attention. This is not an immigration issue. This is a military service issue. This is something that it should have never happened. We should not be using the word deported and veterans in the same sentence. As simple as that. These are individuals who have courageously served our nation, myself included, and yet they find themselves, in this unjust situation, deported from the very country they swore to protect. So the first thing that we need to address is the current delays in humanitarian parole approvals. Veterans are currently, there is an opportunity for them to file a humanitarian parole. This is issued when a veteran is in a country where there is a lot of violence, or if the veteran is suffering from medical conditions, the Department of USCIS awards a humanitarian parole. Unfortunately, because of all the chaos that is currently going on with the immigration system, there's been a lot of delays. There are veterans who find themselves with long periods of waiting for a response to know if they're going to be approved or not. These delays are not merely bureaucratic hurdles, but they're barriers that prevent deported veterans from accessing the support and opportunities that they deserve and that they have earned. The humanitarian parole will grant a temporary entry into the United States, so that way that they can begin working their criminal case and they have access to medical services. In addition to the delays for humanitarian paroles, we have seen a long wait on authorizations for work permits. This is something that is essential for veterans to begin to rebuild their lives and contribute to their communities, honestly. Yet the process, again, is marred by inefficiencies and inconsistencies, is depriving them of the opportunity to earn a living and provide for themselves and their families while they're here in the United States, working to rebuild their lives. These delays are more than administrative inconveniences. They are injustices that demand our immediate attention and action. For anyone who's listening, I would like to call on you to contact your representatives, to make them known and make them aware that there are veterans who are currently in exile. We have veterans who are dying in exile just days before obtaining approval for them to come back to the United States. In June, as of June, we have lost 6 veterans who died while in exile. These are veterans that their lives could have been saved by accessing medical services via the VA if there wasn't such a lag in the process. This is a very unfortunate situation that we have currently going on. With the current immigration system and our current political system, it's really time for us to bring this to the forefront. And quite honestly, to bring this to the attention of our legislators, to the attention of President Biden and our Vice President. This is an opportunity that we have to make this something that changes for the better. legislation, it's really something that we have been working with, and we introduced a bill that it was HR 4569, and it was introduced by Congressman Takano, and we didn't have any support from our representatives in the GOP. This is not surprising, as is something that they didn't even want to be associated with, because it was an immigration issue. However, we continue to let them know that this is not an immigration issue. This is something that should have never happened. Currently, we are experiencing some shortages in enlistment within our branches. Our services are struggling to find recruits who will want to join our services. And once again, they're going to go to those communities, go to the minority communities, and use what they used for me, which it was really offering naturalization, citizenship, as in return for my military service. Although it was something that I was not able to obtain. And it's time for the Department of Defense to deliver. This is a really an unjust situation that we have when immigrants have been served in the military since before the Revolutionary War. And it's just very unfortunate that nothing has been done till today in 2024 to fix this and to prevent from veterans slipping through the cracks. So today I call on you and I ask you to make yourself aware of what's going on. Understand that there are veterans who are serving our country, putting their lives on the line to protect our freedom, and who later on are being discarded and sent to exile because of bureaucratic immigration laws. And I wouldn't be here today had it not been for my military service. My military service gave me so many opportunities, and it made me who I am today. So I don't have anything against joining the military. As a matter of fact, I promote it and I say, why not? This is a great opportunity. You will have access to healthcare, to educational benefits, and really to a community that really embraces you, and you'll have a brotherhood and a sisterhood for life. But I also, at the same time, want to hold the Department of Defense and our leaders accountable for the promises that they've made. It's time to fulfill the promises made to our immigrant service members who signed the dotted line without this being their home country. For us, we consider the United States and America our home. This is the opportunity that we received when we needed it. It gave us opportunities that we can pass down to our children and to our family. And all we want is what you promised. The current situation right now, and it's a very troublesome situation because we don't know what the political landscape is going to look like in 2025. And there are some programs right now that have been put in place by President Biden, by our Democratic representatives, that have provided a pathway and access for veterans to return to the United States. We don't know if we're going to have that in 2025. And that is very scary. It's scary for me that I am here in the United States and that I am a naturalized citizen. And I can only imagine how my fellow brothers and sisters are feeling in a country outside of the United States, away from their families. So it's very important to for the public to be aware of what's going on. And I'm thankful to American Heroes Group to give me this platform and to allow me to inform the public and provide you with updates, so that you are aware of what's going on, and so that when you meet with the representatives, when you meet with those members of Congress, when you have an opportunity to ask those questions, ask them about the veterans and being deported. Ask them what are they going to do to bring them back. And information and education is really something that we must continue to share. For those listening, if you can go to www.repatriateourpatriots.org, you can find more information about current cases, veteran stories. Some of those are success stories. We have on our YouTube website at Repatriate Our Patriots, you can watch videos from service members who have come back, who have obtained their naturalization, and who are currently reunited with their families. So not all stories are bad. We also have a website where you can find more information on how you can get involved, and that is defendourvets.com. www.defendourvets.com. You can find more information about current legislation efforts and about some of the history that will enlighten you on how long this has been going on. Right now, our political arena, it's very positive because of the possibilities that we have ahead of us. We may have our first woman president, and that is going to be just historic, a historic event. And I am sure that immigrants will continue to serve in our military for generations to come. And I am happy that we are granted that opportunity. But I also want to remind our leaders in the Department of Defense and our leaders in politics and our leaders in Congress that we are not just a number. We sign on the data line. We will do it all over again. Despite our injuries, despite our trauma, we will fight for the freedom that we enjoy today, and we will fight to defend our country. All we want to in return is what was promised to us, and that is a pathway to citizenship, a pathway to continue to live in this country that we fought so hard for, and to continue to be a contributing member of society. I'm sorry there. It looks like I was having some connection issues. But something else that I want to share with you is also some of our military spouses that have come to this country with their service members. Some of them find themselves also deported, separated from their family. And this is an issue that impacts everybody, not just service members. This impacts the military families, their children, and it's going to continue to impact our community until something is placed in legislation that is it's mandated to DoD to make sure that it tracks and it considers the pathways and the way that it informs our service members about the opportunities to do and what do they have. I want to also share with the public that you can go to our website. You can follow us on social media at Repatriate Our Patriots. We have several videos that shares some stories from veterans in exile, as well as family members and success stories of veterans' naturalizations after 20 years of being deported. If you want more information about how you can get involved and how you can help, please feel free to follow our social media accounts, go to our website, send us a message at rop@repatriateourpatriots.org, or you can contact myself directly at danitza@repatriateourpatriots.org. We really need everybody's support to make sure that the public is aware of what's going on and that this doesn't happen any longer.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices
hopefully will be a series
are empowered intentionally. Information and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Series of interviews and conversations about geopolitics. And of course, one of our big focuses at the moment is Ukraine, Russia. But this is also a crisis that is playing out around the world. And that's a story we don't see so much in much of the media. I'm delighted to be joined today by D.W. Phillips, who is an adventurous documentary maker. I will ask both of the guests to actually introduce their connection to Ukraine. D.W. Phillips has made some extraordinary documentaries, including many about World War II, and this is one of the topics we're going to be talking about today. Also, I'm joined by Will Blackburn, who is a British Army veteran and has been one of the leading figures behind an aid organization that is bringing military and civilian aid into Ukraine, has been doing so since nearly the start of the full-scale war. So I'm going to ask each to introduce themselves. Then we're going to go through a variety of topics. What's happened in Ukraine, why the Ukraine war is so important and perhaps doesn't get the attention it deserves, as well as Ukrainian victory. And we're also going to talk about D-Day, which I think is an important commemoration, but it has a strong connection to what's happening in Ukraine and the values which Ukrainians are fighting for. So, Mr. Phillips, thanks so much for joining us. Could I ask you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your work, but also especially why Ukraine? What has attracted you to Ukraine? And of course, you have spent considerable time there and you're devoting a lot of energy, resources, and brain power into the Ukrainian cause.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's always good to be with you. Yes, well, to begin with, my great-grandfather escaped Russian persecution from Lviv, Ukraine. He was a Jew who came over with the woman who became his wife and family members and helped to start a Ukrainian community in America. That's my father's side. Also a little bit of Russian in there as well. And those stories have been part of our life. And more recently, we've been rediscovering them. Very important for us. My own work began as a young man. I wrote speeches in one of the presidential administrations for a cabinet secretary. I ended up covering Soviet involvement in sub-Saharan Africa and Central America as a journalist. I was in Angola, sub-Saharan Africa, Nicaragua, Honduras. But in recent years, I've gone from being an attorney to a documentary filmmaker. And over the last 15 to 20 years, I've made a number of television shows and films on the Second World War, as well as other subjects as well. But I have a special fascination and love for the Second World War. My middle name is Winston. I was named after Winston Churchill. My dad loved Churchill. And so that was something that was shared with me from my very early days. But in the last 2 years since the full-scale invasion, I've been on the ground in Ukraine. I've been investigating Russian war atrocities in Bucha, Irpin, around Ukraine. And I've been telling, I think this is important, the story of defiance, faith, hope, courage of the people of Ukraine. Traveling, meeting everybody from athletes to soldiers to teachers to mothers to fathers, and hoping to humanize what I personally believe to be the defining conflict of our generation, the most important conquest conflict since the Second World War, and one that every person on the planet needs to be concerned about.
Well, let's turn to you because you've got a different story, a very different story, but an incredibly compelling one as well. What is the connection you've got to Ukraine, and what was the inspiration behind the extensive action you've taken in terms of helping to organize aid convoys? It looks like we can't get Will up here. When he does join on the main screen, we'll get him to tell his story as well. Well, let's start then, Douglas, with you. I was absolutely riveted to the work you've done recently on Second World War and specifically the commemoration of D-Day. And it seems to me that there's a very intense connection to the values that were being fought for then and the values that are being fought for now. As you were making this film, it'd be great to hear a little bit about the detail of the film, but did you also get that sense of deep connection?
I've been making D-Day films for a while, going back more than a decade now. And more recently, I just came back from Normandy from the 80th anniversary of D-Day. I don't know the number of World War II veterans that I've interviewed, and many of them from D-Day itself, but it's in the hundreds. And I always ask them, in recent years especially, and since the invasion of Ukraine, about their connection, what happened in the past and what they see as the relevance today. And here are some of the things that I hear often repeated. Number one, the same sort of crises that we faced in 1939 to 1945, we're facing now. The same sort of American response, which is divided and mixed, that we saw then, we see that now. The same issues of lack of moral ambiguity, meaning that there is a right and there is a wrong. We saw that then, we see that now. And one of the most impressive messages, which is repeated over and over again, is we literally died so this wouldn't happen again. We gave everything so that the world would change. And in fact, it did change. We introduced a modern rules-based law order, which is part of our 20th century story. But you talk to a veteran and they don't want to see it happen again. It's how can you bring millions of people into a conflict where so many die? I just spent a lot of time with British veterans, with the veterans from, all the allied countries. And while they don't all connect the dots on Ukraine exactly the same, I'd say there's a common consensus. If they're from Europe, they say, we've been there. We want the Americans to wake up. Let's not do it again.
And of course, for quite a number of years through the 1930s, because the First World War was so horrific, so horrendous, and so many millions of people were exposed to that trauma, they didn't want to face up to another war in Europe. They didn't face down the dictators as they took one territory after another. It seems that there's a certain connection now with that as well, in that there's a trepidation in actually tackling Putin and actually pushing him back. Do you get that sense as well of incrementalism, hesitation, trying to avoid what may to you and I seem like an inevitable confrontation, but one which the media, politicians do not seem to want to embrace?
I see people divided into four categories. Category number one is they have been co-opted by Russia, and they have bought full scale into the Russian narrative, and it's usually a response to partisan politics in America. Category number two, they're afraid, they don't want to talk about it. Category number three, they really, really get it. They're behind Ukraine and they want to support it. But category number four is fear. And that fear is, well, Russia has nuclear weapons. What do? Let's just put our toes in very cautiously into this. We're really concerned. And in reality, they're mimicking almost exactly the troubling posture that was part of the American response to what took place with the Third Reich between 1938 and 1942. We're doing it again. I was at a parachute jump with Congressman Dan Crenshaw from Texas, who voted for Ukraine aid. He jumped out of a plane with my daughter, by the way, who's one of the parachutists during the Normandy 80th. I ran up to him, I put a camera in front of his face, and I said, if we did one thing differently today, or if we could hear a message from our World War II fathers, what it would be. And he said, don't wait to the last minute to fight for freedom. You got to do it now. Don't wait, and don't be a coward. And of course, he was a strong supporter of Ukraine.
That's an incredibly strong message there. We've got Will back in the studio. Let's turn to you, because that idea, that thought about confronting evil, I think you've taken that head on, and almost from the start of full-scale war, you've been running aid convoys. Could you tell us about what drove you to that, the inspiration behind it, but also some of the sort of challenges, because you're doing this at quite an impressive scale?
In simplest terms, I I found myself, just a quick introduction, sorry about the technical issues before, found myself living in Poland a few years ago with my wife and leading a very simple life, really. And then February 2022 happened, and very rapidly we found our hometown filling with refugees. And I think the shock of that is, even now thinking back, it was an incredible shock. The speed at which Russia invaded Ukraine, and then suddenly Poland found itself with many, many people escaping the Russian atrocities. And at that point, it was really like a ground rush. We thought, not just ourselves, but everyone in the town thought, we've got to do something. What can we do? Most people, because they had a civilian background, they quite rightly bought nappies, they bought food, dry goods, anything to help people feed themselves and settle down. It was actually my wife who reminded one of the aid workers that I was a veteran and had a little bit of military kit at home, and went back. I don't know why I brought this stuff with me to Poland, because I should have left it in the UK, but I had a helmet, boots, all sorts of military gear that a lot of veterans tend to hang on to, because it's kind of I suppose it's a way of keeping touch with our military past. But my wife said to me, Will, you don't need this stuff, and I think it probably would be better used in Ukraine. So we turned up at the aid center, handed it over. They said, wow, where did you get this from? And we said, well, we've got it at home. I'm a veteran, and just sort of hang on to it, kind of thing. And they said, can you get hold of any more of this? We need helmets. We need everything. We need as much military clothing as we can get, because we're trying to field an army. And I thought, well, hang on, maybe if I got in contact with people I'd served with, went on some military websites, and very rapidly people started sending what they had, everything from boots, rucksacks, all sorts of military paraphernalia that would be useful in the field. And we started collecting it in UK, shipping it over to Poland. I made contact with Polish veterans who were running into Ukraine, running aid and equipment. And we sort of formed a sort of volunteer group. And for the last 2 and a bit years, we've been delivering aid from everywhere, from Lviv down to Odessa, right to the zero line in the Donbass and in Zaporizhia. And yeah, it's been an extraordinary experience. We've gone from really very Heath Robinson setup to now having depots, to having vehicles, and to having a wonderful group of people with wonderful groups of people in Ukraine. And it's quite an extraordinary setup. And we're able to deliver quite specific aid, everything from dog food to people looking after stray animals, civilian clothing and food where it's needed, and obviously specific military equipment where it's needed too.
And how important is that, that you have, because you're running regular aid convoys, you are in touch with people on the sort of zero and first line as well as frontline towns. How important is that feedback mechanism where you get to understand what the immediate need is in a particular area at a particular time? And in a way, are you able to be more sensitive than perhaps some of the larger aid organizations or even governments that are supporting?
Yes, I think a lot of it is psychological aid, and that sounds rather grand. But I think what we realize is clearly we're not providing sort of government level help, clearly. But what we are doing is meeting with people who are living often, sometimes on their own, sometimes within 3 or 4 kilometers of what's known as the zero line. And just to know that people from Poland, from the USA, the UK are thinking of them and caring about them makes a massive difference to their morale. It's extraordinary how just the fascination of why have you done this? Why have you come all this way? And, if we have time, we have a little chat, because sometimes these areas really aren't safe and you can't hang around for too long. But I think that the impact of knowing that people from Europe and the USA and around the world are caring about them is absolutely massive for morale. And whether it be, as I say, in Zaporizhia or in the Donbass, or even up north towards Kupiansk, the impact of that is, particularly at this time when things are pretty tough, is huge.
Well, let's turn to the sort of big issue that's going on at the moment, and that, of course, is that Russia does seem to be running out of some of the essential stuff: men, munitions, and money. It's something that we're covering on the channel in quite a bit of detail here. Of course, they want to give out the impression that they are still strong and able to keep this fight going for many years. But there is a lot more talk about so-called peace deals. And of course, it has been widely discussed in the US media. And you've got the sort of Republican National Congress going on at the moment. And there are some figures there who are pushing this idea of peace strongly. Both of you have this experience of being sort of close to the front line and people who are dealing with that every day. When you speak to Ukrainians, I haven't met a single one who thinks that a peace deal is at this point achievable, nor that Russia is to be trusted as somebody who could be part of a genuine peace deal, in that they have a history of breaking whatever contracts, treaties get signed, or they will abide as long as it's in their interests, and then they won't. Let's talk about the risks here of a peace deal being forced on Ukraine, or countries trying to force something on Ukraine which is not, I would say, a just peace for many of its citizens. DW, let's turn to you, because I'm sure, as I do, you watch the news with some trepidation, and there's a lot of naivety in the media when the subject of peace deals are broached.
Today was an interesting day because President Zelensky had a telephone call with Republican nominee Donald Trump, and both walked away saying it was a great call, 15 to 20 minutes call. My own opinion is that's pure politics. It's in both of their interests to say that. Doesn't necessarily affect what's really going on. I don't know any Ukrainian patriot that will settle for anything less than total victory. I haven't met one, not a single one, and I've met thousands and thousands. They may be there, but I haven't met them. The universal opinion is Russia has to go. We need to get our country back. And while America is very, very important, it isn't important at the expense of their territorial integrity. And what I mean by that is that Ukrainians are the scrappiest, they're beautiful people, and they're real patriots, and they're amazing. Actually, Jonathan, they are right now the light of the world. They're reminding the world about freedom, about this indefatigable spirit. Instead of cursing the darkness, we should be looking at Ukrainians and saying, teach us. We need to be reminded what it is to feel alive, to love freedom and fight for it. But part of that means that whatever peace process is coming up, I just can't imagine them, even with the bad circumstances right now, tolerating some sort of vivisection of their country. Russia has a record that every Ukrainian knows, and academics know, and people who study, politicians may not know it, but it's simply a fact, of breaking more treaties than any other major power of the last 150 years. They are extraordinary for their deception, for their treaty breaking, for the way they approach all of this. And nothing short of a defeat of Russia or the expulsion of Russia really puts the rest of Europe in a place of peace and Ukraine in a place of peace. So this is one reason why there's been a lot of skepticism about statements by Mr. Trump that in one day he could bring an end to things. You notice he doesn't say that about Gaza and Israel, because I think in Gaza and Israel, he understands at the very least you're dealing with terrorists that you really are going to have a hard time negotiating with, regardless of where you stand on that particular issue. But what Americans need to understand is we're dealing with terrorists, with Russia. That's what they are. And they use the tactics of terrorists. So, the short answer is Ukraine's in it for the long haul. And there may be some micro flex points that come up in the future, but I don't think they involve giving up the East. I don't think they involve giving up long-term claims to Crimea. Russia has to be neutralized as a long-term threat.
I'm going to put a slightly different spin on the question for Will, because I'm in Britain. I'm on an island. Russia, no matter what it wants, is not going to be able to invade the British Isles or directly invade America. So to an extent, this war can seem quite distant at times. But you're there in Poland. You're not so far, and of course, Poland has been the target of Russian imperial ambition for many centuries, and indeed was part of the Soviet empire in the post-World War II order. The whole range of countries were essentially given up to Soviet control, and to that fairly barbaric system, which limited freedom, limited innovation and creativity. Do you have that sense in Poland that people are very aware that the threat is not just to Ukraine, but to all states that were formerly under Russia's control?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I came to realize before the invasion, just talking to family members in Poland and just the history, is the folk memory of the fear of Russia. I know when we've spoken before, Jonathan, that one of the things that always really shocked me was that talking to my wife's family, I mean, clearly they suffered tremendously, as everybody did in Poland under the Nazis. But what really shocked me was that as much as they were terrified and the terrified memory of the Nazis in Poland, equally, there was a terrifying memory of the Soviet army in Poland, and a terrifying memory of what they had done after the war. And that goes throughout all of Eastern Europe, and it sat really until 1989 unknown in the West. But what I came to know through my family and also doing reading around is that this fear of Russia and this knowledge of Russia, of how ruthless they are and how mean they are, and how just wicked they are in terms of cruelty. What we've seen most recently and tragically in Bucha and Irpin, as DW was talking about, but elsewhere in Ukraine, this was known about both within my own family history, but also just generally in Eastern Europe and Poland. Exactly the same activities that happened at the end of the Second World War and in the 2 or 3 years, particularly after the Second World War in Poland and Eastern Europe. There's exact same behaviors. I can even remember talking with my wife's grandmother, describing the kind of atrocities that had happened in Bucha. She was describing those 80 years ago in Poland. And I think that folk memory and the current memory and fear, it focuses Eastern Europe in a way that we don't understand in the West. They know, as the Ukrainians know, that there is no choice, that Russia has to be stopped. This is not something that can be negotiated with. This is a rolling monster. And if it's not stopped, then we're all going to have to deal with it in the West and in the US and the wider world. I think what's at stake, it just cannot be reiterated enough. The scale of this war, I know I've talked to you about it before, Jonathan, but having driven almost the entire length of the front line, I think the scale of the war, if people really understood that, just the sheer destruction and the massive front line, I think people would be genuinely frightened in the West and other areas where they just do not understand what is at stake.
And the sheer scale of the devastation. Now, this is, to an extent, a problem, isn't it? Because we see pictures of devastation. It feels alien unless you speak the language, unless you can, really feel it as something that's close to you. It can appear alien and other, and not something that you could translate into your own everyday life. But the threat here isn't just a regional sort of conflict. It's not something that can be kept out of sight, out of mind, or to use the sort of the quote before the Second World War. This is not a war that is, a long way away and to people who are very different from us. Once you speak the language, you kind of know that actually Ukraine shares the same values as we do. They are striving for transparency in their system of government. They're striving for agency, democracy. They want innovation. They want the freedom to create comfortable lives for themselves. Essentially, they're fighting for a rules-based order. And this isn't a phrase I think many people will have heard until a couple of years ago. Russia seems to be challenging not just the rules-based order in Europe and Ukraine, but right across the world, challenging the Western way of doing business and governance. But it seems to me that this is something that is perhaps too complex for much of the media to tackle, or too difficult, or not popular enough. And so if you were just looking at mainstream media sources, you wouldn't get a sense of this global conflict for what are absolutely essential values that make our societies work and make our populations wealthy, or at least give them the chance to generate wealth. DW, does that sound like hyperbole, or do you have a sense that this is the case?
I'm going to put on my constitutional attorney hat and take off my director hat for just a second. What happened at the end of World War II was a fundamental shift for the better. I don't think any of us can calculate the benefits that we have received as a result of the rules-based law order which occurred. I'm talking convention after convention and agreement regarding the kind of values that would govern the modern world. Now, I realize cynics are going to say, yeah, but this happened and that happened. Look what America did here. Look at this there. I'm willing to concede many of those things. That's irrelevant to the main point, which is that the world agreed, the Western world, and Russia joined us, agreed that certain things wouldn't happen. We would no longer wage war on civilians anymore. We're learning that lesson from World War II. We're going to sign agreements like the European Convention on Human Rights, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatments and punishment. All of these were signed by Russia. And by the way, Ukraine is a signatory to them as well. And the entire philosophy that we want to live in a world where, as an American, I can visit Switzerland. I can go to Estonia. I can travel. We can have economic commerce. There are certain things that we are going to follow. We're no longer going to have wars of aggression. Yeah, there are going to be conflicts, but we're not going to be in a situation where one sovereign nation simply invades another one. What Russia has done is said, we don't want that at all. We're going to play the game of pretending we still hold to certain values when it's convenient for us to do so, but we are thumbing every convention that we've signed. Of course, notably in the case of Ukraine, they signed the Budapest Memorandum, in which they took an oath as a nation in exchange for the denuclearization of Ukraine that they would not violate the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So what we're really seeing, big picture, is a fundamental shift, fundamental, in the way the world does business. And if this is not stopped, we're talking about the end of an entire way of thinking, of nations relating one to another, to something which is incredibly dark, incredibly dangerous. And sitting in our nice, comfortable homes, I'm speaking today from the state of Texas, where people are driving beautiful cars, they're going to restaurants, they're having a very nice life. The world's going to look very, very different when we are in constant states of terrorism and military acts of aggression against civilians, and that's considered a normal thing. Right now, we have a chance to stop it. We may not in 5 years.
And Will, on that point as well, you can't help but have observed in the more specialist corners of the media talk of plots of assassination, sabotage across Europe. There is the credible plot to assassinate the head of one of Europe's largest military industrial companies, which is Rheinmetall. If that had actually been carried out, to my mind, that is a clear and flagrant act of war. Fortunately, American intelligence provided the Germans with the information required to stop that. But what DW is talking about here, this not just law of the jungle, but the law of terrorism, doing what you want, where you want, killing who you want, just because they violate your interests or limit your strategic objectives. This is a very dark place we could be heading to.
Absolutely. And I'm going to DW's point about the world order. I think that absolutely that in one of the great victories of the Second World War was the bubble that was bought by thousands upon thousands of American servicemen and British servicemen and other allied servicemen to give us the free world that we had. And I think the thing which we've all come to realize is that it was exactly that. It was a very precious thing. And it is being legitimately threatened now. And people need to understand that. And in order to stand up to it, we need to support Ukraine in any way we can. But to your point, Jonathan, I think that certainly in terms of the Russian attitude to terrorism and pushing and shoving, what we've seen prior to the invasion of Ukraine, both with things like Salisbury and the murder of Litvinenko, is we see that if we don't stand up, if we don't push against Russian aggression, this is what we get. And we need to protect our rules-based order, and we need to do that in a very robust way, in my opinion. And not just in terms of supporting Ukraine, but I think we need to send a very robust message to Russia consistently. But also, I think that in the fact we haven't done that, we have to hold our hands up and say that was part of what has encouraged Russia to behave the way it has. We need to understand that in our philosophy, I know we've talked about this before, there's a sense of offer and acceptance. And I think fundamentally within the Russian culture, there is no offer and acceptance. You just do as you're told. And that very subtle difference, or not so subtle difference, is what sets us massively apart from Russia, both in terms of understanding and in how to deal with them.
Well, I think we could carry on talking for a number of hours on these topics. We are out of time on these. I very much hope we will drill down into some of these issues in subsequent episodes. I'd love to see you both back on this particular stream for this fantastic audience who've very graciously invited us here. But for now, I think we're out of time.
What a pleasure to be here with
Thank
you,
you very
John.
much. Thank you.
Welcome to AHG Connect.